Hey everyone, Dr. D here. Today I'll be explaining the carbonyl group. Carbonyl groups are functional groups. It's essentially when you have an oxygen with a double bond to your carbon backbone, and it gives a property to your molecule. Let's say you have carbon here, and you have carbon here, and then you have carbon here. So you got this molecule with 4 carbons. Let's fill in the hydrogens. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's already done. I'm just making this molecule up. Let's say you have this molecule. This is a carbonyl group. It's O double bond to carbon. Okay, you can spot it because you see the O double bond. Okay, and you would call this a carbonyl group. What properties does a carbonyl group have? Well, polar for one thing, it's polar. Oxygen has a greater electronegativity than carbon. Again, remember what that means. Electronegativity is affinity for electrons, greediness for electrons. Oxygen has more greediness for electrons. Carbon has lower greediness for electrons. You know what that means? Even though they're sharing electrons, they're not going to be sharing the electrons evenly. The electrons are going to be spending a little more time with that oxygen, giving oxygen a partial negative charge, right? So you draw it like that, a partial negative charge. What does that mean? That means it's a polar functional group. That's what polar means right there, that slight negative charge. Okay, and what that will help you do, if you're a molecule and you have a polar functional group attached, you will then mix better with water. So here's water, H2O, and remember, the same deal is going on here with water. Water has a slightly negative, partially negative oxygen and partially positive hydrogens because oxygen has a greater electronegativity than hydrogen. So oxygen's hogging these electrons, becoming partially negative, and hydrogen is losing access to those electrons a little bit. They're still sharing, but it has a partial positive, and the 3 dotted lines represent a hydrogen bond that forms between the partially positive hydrogen of water and the partially negative oxygen of this molecule I drew up. So that will help you to mix with water. Anytime you have a slight charge or a full-on charge, you will be able to mix with water, and water will be able to dissolve you. That's what a polar molecule is, or a charged molecule. Okay. Notice that without that carbonyl group, this molecule wouldn't dissolve in water, would it? Because this molecule is made up of carbons and hydrogens. And remember, carbons and hydrogens have the same electronegativity. There is no difference in greediness, so there is no reason for electrons to be spending more time with one member or another, and you're not going to form those partial charges. You're not going to mix with water if you're not polar, if you don't have those partial charges. Again, remember that this symbol is not an S, it's a little lowercase d, delta. So what this means is partial positive, partial negative. Now, one more thing about the carbonyl groups. There's a difference between a ketone carbonyl group and an aldehyde carbonyl group. What I drew here is a ketone carbonyl group, and how do you know? It's based on the position. This is obviously a carbonyl group because it's O double bond, right? But is it a ketone or aldehyde carbonyl group? Well, here's how you can tell. If the O is double bond to a C, and here's the important part, that C, that carbon, has a carbon on both sides, then it's a ketone carbonyl group. Okay? Now, if the O was over here, let's say that was an H, let's say the O was over here, okay? Now look what you have. That's still a carbonyl group, but now it's an aldehyde carbonyl group. Why? Because O double bond to C. Ask yourself, does that C have a C on both sides? If it doesn't, that's an aldehyde carbonyl group. Okay, so I hope this helped you understand the functional group, carbonyl. Carbonyl groups, again, they are polar functional groups. They help you to mix with water, and they help you to mix with water because they have a partial negative charge to them, which will interact with the partial positive charges on water molecules, specifically those hydrogens on those water molecules. Again, this is Dr. D. Hope you learned something here about the carbonyl group, ketone, aldehyde, carbonyl groups. Please like, subscribe, comment below. If you have any questions, please leave them, and it's always happy to address those. Thanks again for watching. Bye.